Hey everybody, welcome to the Mana Leak. I'm John as always, and it is day 2 of the Aether Revolt set reviews. Today we're going to go over every single blue card in the set. 3 very quick disclaimers. This is a limited set review. I'm talking about draft and sealed only. Number 2, these are my first impressions. I have not played with these cards yet. They are how I'm going to approach the pre-release. They're how I'm going to approach the first few weeks of drafting. My opinions, my ratings might change over time, but my first impressions. And number 3, this was of course just my opinions. This is how I approach the game. You may approach the game in a different way. Do not take anybody's set review, mine, limited resources, anybody's, as the gospel truth. Read them, think about them, and most importantly, discuss them, talk about them. That's the beauty of set reviews. But we're going to jump on into the first card. Up first, we have Aether Swooper. Aether Swooper is 1 and a blue for a creature Vidalcan Artificer. At common, it's a 1/2, it has flying, and it's part of that not thriving cycle, the Aether cycle. When it enters the battlefield, you get 2 energy. Whenever Aether Swooper attacks, you may pay 2 energy. If you do, create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token. Now, at least this one can attack reliably, unlike the white one, because we're not swinging in on turn 5 with a 2/3. But still, a 1/2 flyer for 2 that shoots out a 1/1 servo or 2 if you pay the energy for it. Not really excited by this one either. Still relatively on par with the white one, and I'm not looking to play that one regularly or this one regularly, and I think I would pick it fairly late. C-, you should probably cut this pretty regularly. Up next, we have Aether-Tide Whale. Aether-Tide Whale is 4 blue for a creature whale at rare. It's a 6/4. It has flying, as all whales do, on Kaladesh anyways. When Aether-Tide Whale enters the battlefield, you get energy, 6 energy. Pay 4 energy, return Aether-Tide Whale to its owner's hand. Now that's kind of cool. This is basically the only card that generates more energy than it uses for its kind of big main effect. It's a 6 mana 6/4 flyer, which is nothing to scoff at. It dodges removal because it can just bounce itself, plus give you an energy surplus. It fuels other energy cards very well by giving you 6 energy. It enables revolt by bouncing back. I like this quite a bit. I think it's just a solid straight up bomb, and you should first pick this basically every time. I'm going to go with a solid A on it. It's missing the A+ because it does cost a fair bit, but really there's just no way that you could avoid costing this at 6 mana without it just becoming utterly broken. Solid A, I really like it. Yeah, it's super solid. It enables a lot of different things. Up next is Brawl Chief of Compliance. Brawl Chief of Compliance is 1 and a blue for a legendary creature human wizard at rare. He's a 1/3. And he's got a couple abilities. Instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 single generic mana less to cast. Whenever a spell or ability you control counters a spell, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card, so you loot. I've got to go with a great big meh for Brawl. I think he's probably going to do something in Constructed or in Commander or Casual or something, but Limited, you play so few instant and sorceries anyways that the discount's cool, but not really impactful. You're never going to play a 1/3 for 2. That's an incredibly defensive card that really falls off pretty quick. And you're going to counter what? Maybe 1 spell in the average game of draft or sealed? Maybe 2 if you're like the most controlling limited deck that's ever existed. This guy should go pretty late. It's basically a filler level creature and probably slightly even below that. If a blue-black deck that's really controlling exists, and we'll talk about this a lot over the next couple of days, because I really want it to, maybe he has a slight home, but even still, not great. C-. Brawl has a number of applications that people are excited about, but they are not in limited. Just like SRAM, Brawl has expertise. Brawl's expertise is 3 blue for a sorcery at rare. Return up to 3 target artifacts and or creatures to their owner's hand. You may cast a card with converted mana cost 4 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. Sorcery speed bounce isn't the best, and quote-unquote enabling revolt by paying 5 mana isn't really what I'm in the market for either. It's still a decent tempo play. And getting a free 4-drop is pretty solid. It's likely still totally fine and playable, but the sorcery speed is going to put me off this slightly. I'll go with a B- on it. I really love bounce, even if it's sorcery speed, and bouncing 3 things is still pretty powerful. And the free 4-drop is really what sells it for me to go up into the B range, even though it is still B-. Boy, I wish it was instant, but bouncing 3 things at instant speed plus something else is probably pretty big. Plus, the whole expertise cycle wouldn't actually work that well at instant speed because it doesn't allow you to cast whatever you want, ignoring timing restrictions, and that's why they all are sorceries, so that you can cast creatures and sorceries and etc. Anyways, B- for Brawl's expertise. Bastion Inventor is next. Bastion Inventor is 5 and a blue for a creature Vidalcan Artificer at common. It's a 4/4. It has Improvise, which is the first time we've seen that so far. And it also has Hexproof. So what's Improvise? Well, Improvise is like Convoke if you were around for M15 or back in the original Ravnica. Improvise basically says that your artifacts can help cast this spell. Each artifact you tap, artifact creature or artifact any kind of artifact, after you're done activating mana abilities pays for 1 generic mana. So basically, if I have 5 servos, I can tap those servos, and Bastion Inventor costs me a single blue mana. You can never get rid of the color mana cost. It only does generic mana, but as many artifacts as you have, basically every artifact is a mana rock for you. Now, like Revolt, I don't think you should play bad artifacts just because they trigger, or not trigger, but they help out your improvise things. Don't play bad cards to enable other cards. Play good cards to enable other cards, because there most certainly are good cards out there. There are good artifacts that you'll play anyways. Anyways, for Bastion Inventor, at 6 mana, I'm not touching this. At 5, it's not great. At 4, sure. I'll pay 4 mana for a 4/4 hexproof. 3 or less, I'm all in. That would be amazing. This one will have a range on it for sure, because it will range from wildly unplayable to super good, depending on how many artifacts you're reliably going to have down. As a result, I think it's basically an F to a C+. It's still just a 4/4. You know, even with hexproof, it still just dies in combat. Keep that in mind. So make sure you know when to play this and when not to. It's probably going to be pretty similar to Gearseeker Serpent in that regard. I'd leave this late in the pack, even if I knew I'd play one, just because so few other people should be touching this. I'm going to go with a giant range of F to C+, depending on how many artifacts you have. You're going to want to have a lot. Disallow is up next. Disallow is 1 blue for an instant at rare, counter target spell, activated ability, or triggered ability. Mana abilities, of course, cannot be targeted. Those don't use the stack. They cannot be interacted with in any way, shape, or form. Adding in activated abilities or triggered abilities probably doesn't push this in any way past cancel as far as limited goes. So I think it's going to stay as a sideboard D+. Obviously, if you're in a super controlling deck, I'm going to say this a billion times, I want there to be a really good blue-black control deck in Aether Revolt, and I see the pieces for it. I want it to be good. It was not good in Kaladesh. Anyways, in Sealed, of course, this is much more main deckable, as Cancel usually is, but in Draft, I'm inclined to just leave this sitting in the sideboard unless I am that super controlling deck. D+, it's just Cancel as far as limited is concerned. Yeah, you might hit something here or there that's kind of cool that you hit that, but it's not that much better than Cancel. D+. Dispersion Technician is up next. Dispersion Technician is 4 and a blue for a creature Vidalcan Artificer at common. It's a 3/2, and when Dispersion Technician enters the battlefield, you may return target artifact to its owner's hand. 5 mana for a 3/2, not great. Bouncing explicitly an artifact? Also not great. It enables Revolt, I guess, and maybe it's a decent tempo play against some good artifact creature that your opponent has, but ultimately I feel like this is just too costly and too narrow at the same time to be any good. When I read the name, I was hoping that this was something along the lines of Void Wielder, which was a 1/4 that bounced a creature for 5 mana, or Mistraven, which was a 2 blue 2/2 flyer that bounced a creature, but nope. It just bounces an artifact. I'll leave this till late in the pack, and I think I'll probably regularly cut it. So C- for Dispersion Technician. Up next is Efficient Construction. Efficient Construction is 3 and a blue for an enchantment at uncommon. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. The fact that this is a Thopter probably saves this, and it very solidly is in the build around, won't work all the time, but it'll be a fun story when it does type enchantment, kind of like Goblin Slide, Goblin whatever it was, and all those types of cards that we hear all the stories of people going off with them. It's still not something that I'd really be willing to try too readily, as it is a 4-mana do-nothing enchantment until you actually do cast an artifact. But maybe when I'm feeling like having some fun, maybe later in the format, I'll go deep on this. Yes, this will be something that people go off with, and you'll see videos of it, and it will happen. No, it won't be all that reliable. So I've got to go with a D+ on it. I'll have some fun with it someday, but it's just not reliable enough for me. So D+ for efficient construction. Hinterland Drake is up next. Hinterland Drake is 2 and a blue for a creature Drake at common. To 2/3, it has flying, and Hinterland Drake can't block artifact creatures. So this is a Windrake with a rather narrow downside and 1 extra toughness. The downside, in fact, is so narrow that I probably just don't care about it. You don't really think about how desperately your 2/3 flyers can block. I'm sold. I think this is solid. I'll play these very regularly, and I'm seeing a blue-white flyers deck kind of emerging here at common between this and Windrake and Kaladesh, and the Windrake that we have in white, the Girapur Osprey. We just have a ton of decently costed flyers, and then when we get to the uncommons and the rares, there are some good flyers in this set. So I could see a blue-white flyers deck being pretty beastly, with Hinterland Drake being one of the commons that you're pretty happy to pick up. I'm going to go with a C+ on it. I'll probably just always play it in basically every blue deck ever. Up next is Ice Over. Ice Over is 1 and a blue for an enchantment aura at common. Enchant artifact or creature. Enchanted permanent doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. So not tapping is a big deal on these types of auras and often knocks them down a good bit. They do often cost 2 and a blue or 1 blue though, and they don't hit artifacts, so this does have some upsides to those normal untapping sort of paralysis effects. A lot of things also tap in this set because of crewing and because of improvising, so is this better? Probably not. It's fine. It's certainly not premium removal. It's certainly in no way, shape, or form first pickable. You should be able to get this mid-pack, and it would be an all-rightish place to pick it up there. And I might play the first one, but there's a billion other things that I would prefer over it. I'll go with a C on it. I think it's fine, especially in this set because of the amount of tapping that's going to be done by creatures, even outside of combat, but nothing much higher than a C for Ice Over. Next up is Illusionists Stratagem. There are some hard to say cards in this set. Illusionists Stratagem is 3 and a blue for an instant at uncommon. Exile up to 2 target creatures you control, then return those cards to the battlefield under their owner's control. Draw a card. I'm not super excited by this. 4 mana is a lot to be paying to enable Revolt, I guess. It can save creatures from removal, maybe, or it can give you some ETB effects, but 4 mana, it cantrips, which is nice, but ultimately I feel like this is rather low impact. I'll start it at a C-. I'll keep an eye on it, but if you're doing this for Revolt, it's just not going to work out. You need your Revolt enablers to be really, really, really cheap, and this is not cheap. And flickering 2 creatures to stop removal for 4 mana? You don't really want to keep up 4 mana? I don't really care for Illusionists Stratagem, so I'm going to go with a C-. Leave in the Dust is up next at 3 and a blue. Leave in the Dust is an instant at common. Return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. Draw a card. So change just a couple of words and Illusionists Stratagem suddenly gets really good. When I'm bouncing somebody else's creatures at instant speed, I am in love with a card. 4 mana is a little bit much. I like paying 1 mana for this effect, or 2, I guess. 4 mana is a lot, but, you know, it's bounce, and I love bounce. Getting the card is really nice as well. Probably a totally fine include in most blue decks, and a solid kind of mid-pack pick. It's not quite as high as you would pick something like Voyage's End in Theros. So I'm going to go with a C+ on this. I'm probably going to pick it a little bit higher than that, but C+ for Leave in the Dust. Next up is a blue mythic, Mechanized Production. Mechanized Production is 2 blue for an enchantment aura at mythic. Enchant artifact you control. At the beginning of your upkeep, create a token that's a copy of an enchanted artifact. Then, if you control 8 or more artifacts with the same name as one another, note, not necessarily the same name as the enchanted artifact, you win the game. I love alternate win conditions. I love them, I love them, I love them. I always try to win with them whenever they're in a limited set, unless it's virtually impossible, like Biovisionary was. But yeah, I'm going to draft this card. I'm going to first pick it. First time I see this, I will be snap first picking it. Do I think you should? If you're being competitive? Probably not. It's just not super reliable. It's an 8-turn clock if you toss it on some random non-creature artifact, which has the upside of probably being harder to remove than throwing it on a servo or a thopter or something. But throwing it on a servo or a thopter, you might have a bunch of ways to make them really fast. Then it might actually be a 3-turn clock or a 2-turn clock. Of course, you could attempt to keep it around until you already have 8 servos, but that doesn't sound likely to happen. I feel like with the artifact removal in this set, which also hits enchantment, so if they wanted to, they could hit the Mechanized Production, but I don't see why they wouldn't just hit the artifact. I feel like this is a very, very fragile alternate win condition for this draft format. So ultimately, it's probably like a D+. I will snap first pick this the first time that I see it, though. So D+ for Mechanized Production. There's just too much hate for it. Metallic Rebuke is up next. It's 2 and a blue for an instant at common. Improvise, so you can pay with your artifacts. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 3 generic mana. It's Mana Leak. It is Mana Leak for 1 more mana if you just straight up cast it, but potentially 1 less mana if you use a pair of artifacts to do it. Now, Mana Leak is at its absolute best on turn 2 or 3 in Limited. This cannot be played on turn 2 unless you played a 1-drop artifact, and there's not that many good choices for that, nor are you reliably going to do that. So at best, we're looking at this being a turn 3 counter, and after about turn 5, maybe turn 6, Mana Leak tends to just become bad. You know, your opponent plays their 3 drops and you can't cast it. You can, but he'll just pay the mana for it. Still, you can get some things here or there, and I'd probably always main deck this in sealed, as I do most counter magic. But in draft, I'll probably start this in the sideboard unless I'm super control-y, which of course, as we talked about, I am going to attempt quite heavily in this format, at least to start. Metallic Rebuke gets a sideboard D, a usual counter spell that you shouldn't touch really in draft. Speaking of counterspells you shouldn't touch in draft, Negate is up next. It's 1 and a blue for an instant at common. Counter target non-creature spell. Now, I don't have to say too much about Negate to most of you, but I don't like to ignore newer players. So, quick recap on what is a massively reprinted card. This card has like 20 or 30 different versions out there. It's not good. Don't play it. To slightly expand on that, you can kind of get away with this in sealed because people might play more combat tricks and instants and sorceries and non-creature spells that you may not be able to deal with quite as much. But in draft, it tends to be more of a creatures game, and so this only hits usually a couple of cards in your opponent's deck, and even then you generally don't care too much about them. So you should usually leave this in the sideboard, take this like last pick or last, relevant blue card and you're playing blue in the pack kind of picks, and then leave it in the sideboard. Sideboard it in if you see a planeswalker or if you see something that you just cannot deal with. Side this in, but don't side this in against random enchantments or things like that, or even against like the occasional removal spell. I still wouldn't side in a Negate. It is a solid D. It has very specific uses. Internalize that rating because you will see Negate again and again and again and again for the future of Magic. Up next is Quicksmith Spy. Quicksmith Spy is 3 and a blue for a creature human artificer at rare. She's a 2/3, and she says, when Quicksmith Spy enters the battlefield, target artifact you control gains, quote, tap, draw a card, end quote, for as long as you control Quicksmith Spy. Now this seems pretty cool. It is a little bit overcosted at 4 mana for a 2/3, so you do need to have this hidden artifact. You're not going to play this without having an artifact on the battlefield. If you do, and if that artifact sticks around, it's going to pay for itself several times over. The first card you draw will probably just pay for this, and then more cards will make this well worth the 4 mana. I'd only look to play this in relatively heavy artifact decks. If I have 4 artifacts, I'm not playing this card. But if I have 6, 7, If I'm a blue-black artifacts deck, especially a control-y one, I will definitely play this card for sure. It's kind of basically the same decks that would be happy with a Gearseeker Serpent would be happy with this card. The decks that wouldn't be terribly happy with this either. Probably totally fine to first pick this and build around it if you know you're missing a bomb or a removal in the pack, if many Kaladesh packs are the same as Aether Revolt. But be aware that some, and many, in fact, blue decks should probably leave this out. So I'm going to go with a B on Quakesmith Spy, with, of course, the caveat that you're playing this in a heavy artifact deck. Outside of that, you're just not touching this. Reverse Engineer is next. Reverse Engineer is 3 blue for a sorcery at uncommon. Improvise, draw 3 cards. Not being instant speed hurts this for sure. At 3 blue, it's not really something I'd aim to play. It's basically on the level of Tezzeret's Ambition, which was borderline playable in the right decks. If you're able to go, super late game and you can knock this down to 2 blue or 1 blue or blue, it gets quite a bit better. Again, I'd still probably not play this anywhere that I wouldn't play Tezzeret's Ambition. I'll start this at like a C-. You should take it relatively late. You'll know when you really want to play it. It's going to be in those blue control-y late game kind of decks. So C- for Reverse Engineer. Take it late. Up next is Salvage Scuttler. Salvage Scuttler is 4 and a blue and is not what I thought it was. Looking at the art again. Creature Crab at uncommon for a 4/4. When Salvage Scuttler attacks, return an artifact you control to its owner's hand. I thought the big circle thing was like its shell. I see now that its shell is like a normal crab. I don't really know what's going on with the art in the background there. Who knows? Anyways, I'm super out on this card. I do not think that it's terribly good at all. Yeah, you can enable Revolt and get an extra enter the battlefield effect off your artifacts, but this is just a 4/5. Or sorry, a 4/4 for 5 with a downside. Enable Revolt, enter the battlefield. That's a really narrow and expensive upside. I'm going to just call this a downside. That will just not be enough for me. I guess it's not really totally a downside, but it's not an upside. It's maybe just like a side. I'm not looking to put this much effort and cost into getting a boring 4/4. If this had some sort of land walk or unblockable or evasion or anything like that, sure. But a generic 4/4? No, I'm not jumping through that many hoops. I'm going to give it a D-. Shielded Aether Thief is up next. Shielded Aether Thief is a 1 and a blue creature Vidalcan Rogue at uncommon. It's an 0/4. It has flash, so you can cast it anytime. You can cast an instant. Whenever Shielded Aether Thief blocks, you get an energy. Tap, pay 3 energy, draw a card. Seems like a card that I would really enjoy when I play the blue-black late-game control deck. This reminds me sort of Nivix Barrier, which was an 0/4 flash wall. It also did another thing. It did -4/-0 to an attacker. But I like that flash surprise. Hey, I can actually block your thing without any problem whatsoever. The fact that you build up energy for every block, and an 0/4 is going to block a lot of things. In fact, it even discourages the chump checks that people do, that I regularly do, where you attack a 2/2 into an 0/4 just to see if you can get through. If somebody attacks a 2/2 into this 0/4, they have a trick. Don't block. Yeah, so get yourself 3 energy and tap this, and you start to draw cards off of it. Oh, I like this a lot. I think it's going to be a cornerstone of a control-y blue-based deck. I'm going to go with a solid B on this card. I really, really, really like this card. Shielded Aether Thief. I think it's fantastic. Solid B. Up next is Shipwreck Moray. Shipwreck Moray is 3 and a blue for a creature fish. Why don't they make an eel subtype? At common, it's an 0/5. When Shipwreck Moray enters the battlefield, you get 4 energy. Pay 1 energy. Shipwreck Moray gets +2/-2 until end of turn. So you can get yourself a 2/3, or you can get yourself a 4/1, or you can kill Shipwreck Moray, but I wouldn't recommend that. This probably just costs too much to actually work. 4 mana is quite a bit. So turn 5, it can attack, and you get yourself a 4/1 on turn 5. That's way too late. The versatility of it being a decent blocker is nice, and 4 energy is quite a bit for the energy decks that will want it. But I think this will likely be kind of similar to High Tide Hermit. It'll be a bit too overcosted, and it almost works better as just like an energy battery for other better cards, because it does block very well. So if you are sort of big energy, I could see you valuing this a little bit higher, but I'm going to go with a C- on Shipwreck Moray. I don't think it should see that much play. Skyship Plunderer is up next. Skyship Plunderer is 1 and a blue for a creature human pirate at uncommon. It's a 2/1. It has flying. Whenever Skyship Plunderer deals combat damage to a player, for each kind of counter on target permanent or player, give that permanent or player another counter of that kind. Very important. Don't always trust the rough translations of cards when they're first spoiled, because when this was first spoiled, it said, choose any number of target permanents or players, and then put counters on all of them. Basically what proliferate, the keyword from New Phyrexia, was. It doesn't say that. You pick one target permanent or player and give a counter that it already has to it. Now that will of course drop my initial rating of this card, which was a straight up B, because wow, antheming your board of creatures that already have counters is huge. This is a 2/1 flyer for 2. I'm sold on a 2/1 flyer for 2. That's fantastic. The fact that this one can actually block, although you're still not going to block with it, makes it even better than a Welkin Turn or better than a Vaporkin or anything like that. Solid, aggressive flyer. I think the blue-white flyer deck can be pretty disgusting with some of these flyers that are in there, and just the density of cheap flyers at common and uncommon. I will gladly pick this pretty highly because, of course, getting an extra energy when it hits or getting an extra counter on something else, or if you can get counters on this and then getting more counters on it, would be quite solid. But still, 2/1 flyer for 2 is already very good. I'm in. B-. I like Skyship Plunderer quite a bit. Wish it had proliferate, but it does not. So B- for Skyship Plunderer. Take Into Custody is up next. Take Into Custody is a single blue mana for an instant at common. Tap target creature. It doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. I really want Wizards to keyword this freaking mechanic. Call it freeze. It's so much better than all of this blah, blah, blah. Anyways, spending an entire card and 1 mana just to freeze one creature? It's not worth it. This has its homes for sure. If blue can support an aggressive deck, which I don't know that it can, then this could just help you continue getting the beats through to your opponent's face. But really, I'm just out on this. I think you should pick it up rather late, and I don't think that you should often include it. It's an okay combat trick. If you really need to live an extra turn, maybe you can do something with it, but it's just way too costly. Even at a single mana for me, it really needs to draw a card or something. I'm at a D+ for Take Into Custody. Trophy Mage is up next. She's 2 and a blue for a creature human wizard at uncommon. She's a 2/2, and when Trophy Mage enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an artifact card with converted mana cost 3, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. This obviously depends entirely on how good your artifacts are in your deck that are 3 mana and below. This could range from garbage, you're paying 3 mana for a 2/2, to amazing if you're going and grabbing, I don't know, a Renegade Freighter or anything, a rare, going and grabbing a Smuggler's Copter or something. This would just be fantastic. So this is really something that you sort of have to judge for yourself, and I don't think that you take it and hope you get something worthwhile. I think you leave this in the pack. You leave this into the pack until you already have a target, because if you don't ever get a target that's worthwhile, I just don't see this being very good. It draws a card, but if that card's a puzzle knot or an implement, who cares? It's garbage. I'm not super sold on this card being a high pick. I'm going to give it a C-, but of course it does go significantly up if you've got yourself a Heart of Kirin or something ridiculous that she can go and fetch. So C-, but obviously your mileage may vary depending on what you get and how lucky you are. Our second last card is Whir of Invention. Whir of Invention is an X blue instant at rare. It has improvise, so it can be cheaper. Search your library for an artifact card with converted mana cost X or less. Put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Like Trophy Mage, I think this is also entirely dependent on how good your artifacts are and how well you opened, because of course you're going to want to be hitting really bomby things with this. You're going to want to be hitting the disgustingly broken vehicles that we'll take a look at in a few days. You're going to be wanting to hit a Gear Hulk or something just ridiculous and paying a lot for it. Now, there's some problems with this. If you've already drawn the card, you're not going to get to play it. If you've already played the card, you're not going to get to do much with Whir of Invention. Using Whir of Invention to go and grab a 3-drop common artifact creature doesn't really seem that good to me. I'm just not really terribly big on Whir of Invention. Even if you somehow go off and you get a bunch of servos and you get to cast this for like X equals 5 or 6 on turn, I don't even know how early you could do it. Let's say turn 4, although I bet that is just ridiculously optimistic. I still just don't think it's going to work. I think this is just probably an F in Limited. Obviously in Constructed you could do some disgusting things with this because you can determine how powerful the artifacts are in your deck, but you can't do that as much in Draft. Yeah, I'm sorry. I got to go with an F on this. I don't think you should ever really pick this or try to go off with it. So F for Whir of Invention. Our final card for blue is Windkin Raiders. Windkin Raiders is 4 blue for a creature, human artificer at uncommon. It's a 4/3. It's got improvise, so it can be cheaper. And it has flying, and that's about it. That's all she wrote for Windkin Raiders. At a single discount, I'm not playing this very regularly. At 5 mana, it's just kind of fine. 2 mana discount, yeah, I'm in. Sure, why not? Beyond that, it gets pretty good. Blue, I feel, is one of the heavier kind of, oh my god, I want artifacts type deck. So I do think that this could be a pretty decent pickup. Still, it's going to vary wildly depending on your deck. I'll go with like a B- on it because I do think that first discount makes this fine enough, and that second discount makes this just great. I'll pay 4 mana for a 4/3 flyer any day. Yeah, so it's going to vary wildly. I'll go with a B-. I think you probably do pick this relatively highly just because blue is naturally going to want a bunch of artifacts just based on how a ton of the blue cards in the set look. And as we'll talk more tomorrow, the blue-black artifact control deck looks fantastic, and this would slot right in. So I'll go with a B- on Windkin Raiders. So that's going to wrap it up for the blue set review. Blue looks interesting. There's a lot of bad cards, as blue often has. You know, the counter spells just are not for Limited, but it also has a lot of great cards. The Aether Whale, the Quicksmith Spy paired with an artifact. Tons of stuff that goes really well with artifacts, and a potentially control-y deck that I really want to exist. We'll talk about that more when we talk about the black removal and the artifact cards that matter there, and etc. And of course, we'll talk about that when we talk about some little guy named Deseret. Yeah, so make sure that you do check all of that out. Let me know what you are thinking about blue in Aether Revolt down in the comments below. Let me know what you think about my ratings, your own personal ratings, etc., etc., etc. As always, if you like my content, please share it around. Post it on Reddit, post it on your local Facebook groups, etc. Sharing is a fantastic way to help this channel grow. Click that thumbs up button if you do like the content. Click subscribe if you haven't already. And if you do have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you can find me over on Twitter at TheManaLeak. That's L-E-E-K, like the vegetable, not the card. You can find me at twitch.tv/TheManaLeak, facebook.com/TheManaLeak, and patreon.com/TheManaLeak if you want to throw some support and become a patron. There are various reward tiers, etc. So check that out. But if you do have any questions, comments, or suggestions, let me know. Otherwise, see you all tomorrow for the black set review.